Welcome to South Church. We are a Unitarian Universalist church. We are so glad you could join us this morning. If this is your first time, we welcome you warmly, and we hope that you'll continue to come back. And if you have been here for a long time, we are so glad that you continue to join us and be with us, because we need one another. And we welcome you to this Unitarian Universalist worship service. My name is Reverend Susan Suchocki Brown, and I am your interim minister. I was named to this position in early March, and I want to take a little time at the beginning of each services to tell you a little bit about myself so that you get to know me. I came into the ministry late after 20 plus years working in substance abuse and mental health issues. I found that the fascination I had for addictions and mental health issues was because it affected large members of a community, families and siblings and all the other people that the person struggling with was in touch with. My own Grampy Faye had a long period of sobriety. You've heard me talk about him and how delightful he was. He struggled with his addictions, and I think that probably planted the seed for me to work in the addiction field. I worked at a small hospital in Ashburnham, Massachusetts for 20-some years. I started there painting ceilings while I was working my way through school at Mount Wachusett Community College and then at UMass. When I graduated from University of Mass, I graduated with a specialized degree in alcohol abuse counseling and education. It was a program that I wrote, that I designed myself, that I used life experiences, and I was able to get my bachelor's from there in the addiction field. I have found that working in that field has helped me in my ministry because I understand and I can grasp the pain, the struggles, the discomfort, the anxiety and concerns, much that is with us now as we're struggling through this very odd and different time. I am on the board of Spectrum Health Associates, and I have been on that board since 1998. I have to say that I'm particularly proud that we're able to continue to offer services for all those who come through our doors. We have 2 inpatient detoxification treatments and 14 outpatients, and we work in many jails throughout the country. And we've not had to stop giving services. Much like South Church, that staff has had to adapt and change and transition and think on its feet so it can continue to be of service. I know that you will learn more about me as we go on, but a little bit each time I want to tell you about me. If I haven't already said it, I think I did, but my name is Susan Suchocki Brown, and I am so happy to be your interim minister, and I am so happy to welcome you here to this worship service this morning.
The Shared Ministry Committee would like to remind you that there are still 10 days to apply to be a worship, pastoral, fellowship, learning, or pastoral associate. More information can be found on the South Church website by searching Shared Ministry. Reach out to the office and we'll put you in touch with a committee member. The Pocket Garden Tour has been rescheduled to September 11th and 12th of 2020, but you can support the tour now by purchasing a bloom or by volunteering throughout the summer. Contact the Pocket Garden Tour Committee at pgt@southchurch-uu.org.
My life flows on in endless song, above us lamentation. I hear the real, though far off hymn that hails a new creation. Through all the tumult and the strife, I hear the music ringing. It sounds an echo in my soul. How can I keep from singing? What though the tempest loudly roars? I hear the truth it liveth. What though the darkness round me close? Songs in the night it giveth. No storm can shake my inmost calm, while to that rock I'm clinging. Since love is Lord of heaven and earth, how can I keep from singing?
Good morning. My name is Bob Vaccaro, and I'm one of 7 worship associates who assist our interminister and wonderful staff in developing our Sunday services. Actually, in this time of new technologies, I think I was more of a drain on Kirsten, 1 hour to help you learn how to record these things. So it's kind of an illusion of being helpful. Our music is going to be given this morning by our wonderful South Church folk group, and our sermon will be delivered by Paul Strand. Now, Paul has been in our church for 30 years, and I've been here longer than him, and we've never had a conversation except preparation for the service. So I think that's amazing. Paul and I guess Deanna together joined South Church during Bob Carnan's tenure, and they actually were married in this church. Paul worked for 25 years as a social worker, and he is now a self-employed carpenter, setting his own schedule. And he's the son of a minister, and he's been active in I think 2 searches for either one an interim minister and one a settled minister here. In fact, I think he was on the search committee for Chris and Lauren. And he's been on the committee on ministry, and he's been on the board. And so I look forward to his sermon. I want to say one thing about our chats. We've in the past we've suggested that you not chat during the sermon and prayer time, but in fact that's not easy to do, because people who enter the service after it starts are in a little bit different time cycle, and they don't know that they're chatting during those times. So the best thing is for you to implement the stop chat, which you can do, and then continue chat if it's distracting for you. And when you continue the chat, you'll catch up with the chats that you missed. For my opening words, I want to talk about our son Brian. Tomorrow will be the 4th year anniversary of the last time Jackie and I saw him alive. And he went into isolation for a couple of days after our last times with him, and then took his life a day or 2 after that. And for the last 4 years, we've as a family, Jackie and I and our daughters Lynn and Amy have talked quite a bit about what went wrong during those days. What might we have done differently? We didn't call the police right away for several reasons, etc. And we had hoped he was going to come back on his own, which would have been the right thing and or the good thing, and it didn't happen. I haven't spent as much time as I have this past week thinking about my last meeting with him, which is what I want to share with you. it took place in this very room. This is my office, and at that time also my part-time bedroom when I was in Portsmouth. We had just completed our juicing together. We had a deal where I provided I was growing wheatgrass and two sprouts, and provided cucumbers and celery, and we would drink shots of wheatgrass juice and a large green drink. And so I provided the materials, and he did all the work. And it was about, so we probably did this probably 9:30, maybe 10 o'clock at the latest in the morning. And we might have drank mostly in silence. Maybe he would remind me how much he loved the taste of wheatgrass juice. In fact, he would like to add his wheatgrass juice to his green drink, and mine was just the opposite. For me, it would wreck the green drink, and I didn't like the taste of wheatgrass juice. And at the end of our drinking together, he might have even cleaned up, and I asked him, I said, Brian, do you have any time today to do a dump run for me? And he said, Dad, absolutely not. I've got to, and I might have asked him, well, what's happening today? And he said, well, at 3 o'clock, I've got to be at Mom's. I'm reporting for work. And in that period, he was taking care of Bob Nielsen. In fact, he called himself, Bob was recovering from a stroke and still in pretty bad shape. And he considered himself an elder care professional. He was very proud of it. He would sit with them. He would cook for him, and stoke the fires, whatever needed to be done around the house, especially if Jackie was out. And before that, he had to take his truck for a servicing, and we learned later from the invoice that it was checking the fluids, as if he was preparing for a trip, and he might have been preparing for a trip. And he also had an appointment with his dentist for dental cleaning. And it crossed my mind that in the past I would have said something like, "Oh, well, you have time to put in a half-hour dump run or something." I would have, but I caught myself, and I said, Brian, that's fine. I'm glad you have a full day. And that moment made all the difference in terms of, it was transformative for both of us. One that he was so clear that his life was fine without me trying to embellish or add to it, as if a dump run was going to enhance his life. And for me, it was letting go of the need to have him be more than he was. And the lesson in that moment was that, he knew what was enough for him for his life, and he also knew in one day how he could pace himself. The lessons I still don't know. And when I think about this story in the context of our pandemic, this was a traumatic time for us as a family, and probably makes this pandemic a cakewalk by comparison for us. So in a way, it kind of prepared us for the trauma we're going through. And I want to recognize that we are being traumatized. We're going to have a lot of grieving to do. And I just think that there are times we can focus on what's going wrong, and there's times we can focus on what's going right. And I think we need to balance that, I guess, is the lesson I want to say. I want to end right there and let you decide if there's lessons for you in this story. Thank you. So in my community house, we do not allow open flames, so I'm not lighting a chalice, but I want you to reflect while you watch your church members light chalice, adults and kids. And it's just wonderful to see this. And maybe it's the Catholic in me, but reflect on the people who you want to pray for during this time. I'm thinking about the grocery store clerks who are suddenly not that happy to see us enter their store. I'm thinking about the restaurant workers who are now out of work and calling, all day long to get unemployment benefits. And thinking of the people who are huddled in prisons or homeless shelters where they cannot do physical distancing. And thinking of people in nursing homes who are deprived of visits from their family members. Or the family members who are deprived of the opportunity to visit their loved ones. I'm thinking of people in Africa where there's so much fewer ventilators available, and so it's even going to be more suffering. And also the people in our own lives that you might know who are affected by this. So that's my thought for this chalice lighting. I encourage you to read along with me our mission statement. At South Church, we nurture spiritual growth through worship, learning, and community. We celebrate the worth and dignity of all people, and we inspire one another to act on our faith in the larger community.
Hi, everyone. We're back to tell you another story. Today, we're telling you a story that happens in a forest. And an interesting little fact, both Jen Del Deo and I went to college for forestry for a little while, back at a different time in our lives. So we have a special place in our heart for forests. And I think you're going to love this story that Jen wrote.
There's a little forest at the edge of town. There are different kinds of trees and mammals, plants, insects, rocks, a little stream, a few salamanders, mushrooms. There are lots of kinds of life and earth elements, and they are each just one part of the big forest picture. All things in a forest depend on other things in the forest. I mean, you couldn't ever have just trees and nothing else, right?
So in this normal New England forest, there are eastern gray squirrels, eastern chipmunks, and they always had a relationship where they weren't really friends, but they certainly weren't enemies either. They all just did their work of making homes and collecting food and raising baby squirrels and baby chipmunks. It's a little bit dangerous to be a smallish rodent. You know who wants to eat squirrels and chipmunks? Everyone. Well, not everyone, but lots of carnivores like hawks, coyotes, bobcats, owls, foxes, eagles, fishers, and others. So you have to pay really close attention to your surroundings if you're a squirrel or a chipmunk.
Yeah. And squirrels and chipmunks don't eat each other. They don't eat each other, but they do have really similar diets. And one thing they both especially love is acorns. Luckily, there's usually enough food for all of them, and they always lived right next to each other without much trouble. These little creatures actually help each other when there are predators around who might eat them. Squirrels and chipmunks both make special alarm sounds when danger is present. It only takes one chipmunk or squirrel to notice there's danger, and suddenly they sound an alarm and everyone takes shelter until the danger has passed. That's a pretty good system, right?
In this forest at the edge of town, there was a red fox who started to get frustrated that the delicious squirrels and chipmunks would all run to safety before he could get at them. Fox tried and tried to sneak up, but he was always spotted and couldn't quite get any of those tasty little animals. Now, you may have heard that red foxes are clever. This one was quite clever indeed. Fox made a plan and shared the plan with Crow, who's also quite clever. Crow won't really hunt for squirrels and chippies, but if you're offering a nice rodent dinner that's all ready to eat, then Crow is first in line for that. So Fox and Crow made the plan and waited for nighttime. When the squirrels and the chippies were all tucked into their drays and burrows, Fox and Crow went into the little forest and they collected all the acorns and they gathered them up and took them out of sight.
And when the squirrels and chippies woke up with the sun, they shook out their fluffy tails as usual. They rubbed their little rodent eyes and they said their good mornings to their families. But when it was time to get to their daily work of collecting acorns, they noticed that the acorns were just gone, vanished. They were confused and suddenly a little panicked. And when there's confusion and panic, we don't always think straight. Crow flew in and landed on a high branch near a panicked squirrel. Crow whispered to it, "Psst, looking for acorns? I saw those little chipmunks racing to hoard them while you were sleeping." The squirrel looked at Crow. "Really? Why? And where did they put them?" "Probably in those weird little burrows they sleep in. It's just not normal that they should make their homes on the ground. No wonder ground predators are attracted to this area. Makes it dangerous for you when you're down there collecting food."
Well, Crow flew off and the squirrel went to tell the others. Crow landed on the ground near a frantic chipmunk and whispered, "Psst, looking for acorns? I saw those creepy squirrels racing to hoard them while you were sleeping. They put them all up in their trees. It's just not normal to build homes up there, attracting the flying predators. They make life so dangerous for you." You can probably imagine, things got a bit nasty between the squirrels and the chipmunks after this. They all thought the other one was to blame for taking all the acorns and for making their lives so dangerous. They started regularly yelling at each other, pushing each other around. They held protests and rallies to try to get each other banned from the forest.
All this focus on being angry and afraid made them forget to watch carefully for predators. And so there was no alarm sounded when Fox came in and started scooping up squirrels and chippies. He had made a big cage and he started putting them into it to keep them alive and trapped so he'd have nice fresh meals all winter. He went back and forth for an hour or so, scooping up all the fighting rodents who weren't noticing him and filling the cage. By the time the squirrels and chippies who hadn't been scooped up noticed what was happening, the cage was full of lots of their family members and friends. "Look what you did." "Me? No, this is your fault." All the chippies and squirrels blamed each other for causing the distraction that allowed so many to be caught. "If you hadn't hoarded all the acorns, this never would have happened." "We didn't hoard the acorns, you took them all."
A beautiful blue-spotted salamander crawled out from under a rock to see what all the noise was about, because salamanders do not like loud noise. She heard the argument and told them they were all mistaken.
"I was out walking last night and saw some unusual activity. Fox and Crow were collecting all of the acorns they could at a really impressive speed. I thought it was strange, but I was just happy that they were too busy to notice me and eat me, so I continued on my way. You all are blaming each other for something that Fox and Crow did. Now they've taken your friends and families, and still you blame each other."
This news was heavy and upsetting, and they were so sorry. The squirrels and chippies looked at each other, and they felt their hearts squeeze a bit. Then they made a quick plan, and they worked together to weave a giant sack out of roots and grass. They took that sack in the direction that the salamander said Fox and Crow had taken the acorns, and they found the stash of beautiful nuts. They filled the sack to the top, and working all together, they pulled that giant sack to where Fox had the cage.
When they got close, they could see the cage and Fox and Crow. They carefully and quietly pulled the sack all the way up a big tree. One squirrel stayed at the bottom of the tree, and when the sack was in place, the squirrel made squirrely noises. Fox and Crow heard the sounds and went to make sure the squirrel wouldn't set the others free.
When Fox and Crow were almost at the tree, the squirrel ran up the tree, and the rodents emptied that sack of acorns right down onto the heads of Fox and Crow, who were knocked right out. Squirrels and chipmunks raced to break the cage and set everyone free. And they all got back to their forest community before Fox and Crow woke up to find the cage empty and broken.
After that, all the eastern chipmunks and eastern gray squirrels went back to helping each other in their community. Only now, they actually were friends and not just neighbors. I wonder if you liked hearing that story.
I wonder if anything in that story sounds familiar, like it might have happened to you in some different kind of way before.
I wonder what people should do when they make an assumption and realize that they were wrong about something.
I wonder if you might hear some squirrel and chipmunk noises the next time you go outside.
I'm excited for that. It'll be nice to go outside today.
Mm.
I know for sure that I am really grateful for our actors who joined us today to give us some visuals while we told this story. And I know that I miss you all, and I can't wait to see you soon.
Me too.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
This month, and this is the final Sunday of the month, we're splitting our collection with an organization in Maine called 350 Maine. It's a group of enthusiastic young people who are leading the charge in Maine for climate justice and climate change. And one thing I love about the group is that even on their website, they acknowledge that our production of animal products creates 20% of our gas emissions. And I think that's the tip of the iceberg in terms of the problems of eating animal products. So I'm encourage you to donate as you can, and I'm happy that you can do it in the privacy of your home and not as a public display of generosity. So follow the directions on the screen.
May I be filled with loving kindness. May I be well. May I be filled with loving kindness.
May I be well.
May I be peaceful and at ease. May I be whole.
May you be filled with loving kindness.
May you be well.
May you be filled with loving kindness.
May you be well.
May you be peaceful and at ease.
May you be whole.
May we be filled with loving kindness. May we be well. May we be filled with loving kindness.
May we be well.
May we be peaceful and at ease.
May we be whole.
I invite you into some moments of prayerful reflection. At this time, what I would encourage you to do is list your prayer concerns in the chat box in the comments section. One of the things that we have been particularly concerned about is that you might have prayers, you might have needs that we're not hearing. And when we meet virtually like this, it's hard to make sure that we've taken care of everyone's needs. So what I would like you to do is, as I say, a little prayer, and then we'll have a musical and a visual interlude. I'd like you to write comments, prayers, thoughts for those that you love, those that you care about, those that you want us to reach out to. We have our pastoral associates, we have our staff, we have people who are anxious to be of service. And we want you to take time now to think about those prayerful needs that you or others, loved ones, neighbors, the world needs right now. And now I invite you to center into prayer, as I say. Holy One of blessing, we are gathered here this morning, though virtually. We are gathered here because we care, because we have compassion, because we know that the world will only get better if we come together in love, without fear and without judgment. We know that there are people who are struggling. We know that there are people who are in pain. We know that there are people who are lonesome and feeling isolated. This is a most unusual of times, and we need moments of silent reflection. We need moments of music. We need moments of words of hope and strength. And most of all, we need one another. Let us hold in our hearts and our minds all those who have prayer needs, all those who can express or just want to hold in their hearts the names of those in need. We gathered in love, and let us now be together and listen in silence. May we be blessed by the presence of one another, the caring and compassion that is felt here. So be it.
I arrived in the city of everywhere early one morning. It was cold and there were flurries of snow on the ground. As I stepped from the train to the platform, I noticed that the baggage man and the red cap were warmly attired in heavy coats and gloves, but oddly enough, they wore no shoes. Repressing my impulse to ask the reason for this odd practice, I went to the station and inquired the way to the hotel. My curiosity, however, was increased by my discovery that no one in the station wore any shoes. Boarding the streetcar, I saw that my fellow travelers were likewise barefoot. And upon arriving at the hotel, I found that the bellhop, the desk clerk, and all the residents were void of shoes. Unable to restrain myself any longer, I asked the manager what this strange practice meant. "What practice?" said he. "Why," said I, pointing to his bare feet, "why don't you wear any shoes in this town?" "Ah," said he, "that's just it. Why don't we?" "But what's the matter? Don't you believe in shoes?" "Believe in shoes, my friend? I should say we do. That is the first article of our creed. Shoes. They are indispensable to the well-being of humanity. Such frostbite, cuts, sores, and suffering those shoes prevent. It is wonderful." "Well then, why don't you wear them?" I asked, totally bewildered. "Ah," he said thoughtfully, "that's just it. Why don't we?" Though considerably nonplussed, I checked in, secured my room, and went directly to the coffee shop. There I deliberately sat down by an amiable-looking but barefoot gentleman. Friendly enough, he suggested that we look around the city after our meal. The first thing we noticed upon emerging from the hotel was a huge brick structure of impressive proportions. He pointed to this with pride. "You see that?" said he. "That is one of our outstanding shoe manufacturing establishments." "A what?" I asked in amazement. "You mean you make shoes there?" "Well, not exactly," said he, a bit abashed. "We talk about making shoes there, and believe me, we have one of the most brilliant fellows you have ever heard. He talks most thrillingly and convincingly every week on this great subject of shoes. Just yesterday, he moved the people profoundly with his exposition of the necessity of shoe wearing. Many broke down and wept. It was really wonderful." "But why don't they wear them?" said I insistently. "That's just it. Why don't we?" Just then, as we turned down a side street, I saw through a cellar window a cobbler actually making a pair of shoes. Excusing myself from my friend, I burst into the little shop and asked the shoemaker how it happened that his shop was not overrun with customers. "Nobody wants my shoes," he said. "They just talk about them." "Give me what pairs you have ready," I said eagerly, and paid him twice the amount he modestly asked. Hurriedly, I returned to my friend and offered them to him, saying, "Here, my friend, one of these pairs of shoes will surely fit you. Take them, put them on. They will save untold suffering." "Oh, thank you," he said with embarrassment, "but you don't understand. It just isn't being done." And coming out of the city of everywhere, over and over and over, that question rang in my ears. Why don't we? Why don't we? I was probably about 10 years old the first time I heard this story, sitting in the pew of the Lutheran church my father served as minister. Dad had used it as a sermon illustration, and it's a story that stuck with me, and I must confess that the sermon itself did not. The author was a Welsh Methodist minister, Hugh Price Hughes, who lived in the second half of the 1800s. He had written it as a modern-day parable to illustrate that Christians who did not pray were the equivalent of the people of everywhere who wore no shoes. Praying was a good idea and an ideal to aspire to, but it was just not done. This story has popped into my mind from time to time over the past several years as I listen to the news and read the paper. And not because I don't think people are praying enough, but rather because the differences between my liberal worldview and those of the right seem as different as people who wear shoes and those who do not. It seems fundamental to me that wearing shoes is a good idea for all the reasons the story suggests. How is it that those who hold different positions and opinions than me can think that that way when the rightness of my position is obvious? How can supporters of the president say they come to his rallies to hear the truth when the Washington Post has counted 18,000 of his statements being false or misleading? How can those around him, people of high accomplishment and reputation, treat him with such deference and respect when they know he is just making it up? How can women support him when they know his track record in his treatment of women? How can his supporters call him the most pro-military president of all time when he paid to get a medical deferment to stay out of Vietnam? How can, well, the list can go on, and I am certain that many of you could finish the statement, how can? The response to the coronavirus only adds more fuel to this fire. There are many scholars who have written on the psychological differences between the left and the right. One is Danigal Goldthwait Young, a professor of communication studies at the University of Delaware. She recently wrote a book entitled Irony and Outrage, the polarized landscape of rage, fear, and laughter in the United States. Her thesis is that the increasingly polarized political landscape that has developed over the past few decades are dominated by the comedic satire on the left and outrage on the right. On the left, comedy and satire dominate the TV landscape. Jon Stewart, John Oliver, and Stephen Colbert, to name but a few, have all become wildly popular as they skewer the politics of the day. Over at Fox News, Sean Hannity, Laura Ingraham, Tucker Carlson, and formerly Bill O'Reilly have made Fox the most watched news network as they provide a daily diet of the latest outrage by the left. These differences are not only psychological, they are physiological as well. Conservatives and liberals are wired differently. In a printed interview in Salon recently, Dr. Young states, in the last 2 decades, political psychologists have done experimental and survey work and even physiological work that has consistently pointed to distinct psychological traits between the left and the right. Liberals tend to be higher in tolerance for ambiguity. That means they are more comfortable with situations, schedules, routines, and contexts that are uncertain. And they tend to have higher need for cognition, which simply means that they seek out and enjoy the process of working through information that is complex. On the other hand, conservatives tend to be higher in need for closure. They are less tolerant of ambiguity. They are less comfortable with uncertainty. They like constructs, routines, and situations that are predictable, ordered, and fixed. They are lower in need for cognition, which, as I always say, is not an indication that conservatives are not smart. It's not an indication that they don't know things. It is an indication that they have a different motivation as they process information in the world. They are governed by peripheral cues, which are heuristics or shortcuts that allow them to efficiently tap into gut reactions or emotional reactions. And they do it in a way that is consistent across judgments over time. So they respond to things quickly and efficiently in a way that liberals do not. She continues, conservative outrage is so threat-oriented and presents information very clearly, very didactically. You don't have to work to understand what Sean Hannity is saying. You don't have to work to understand who he thinks we should be angry at, who we should fear, and what we should do about it. It's very, very clear. He also, someone like Hannity especially, presents himself as morally serious and as certain as news for someone who would be perhaps less comfortable with the hybridity that you have in the world of satire. Now, the theme for this month is liberation, and I promise I will get there. The intention here is not to talk politics from the pulpit or the virtual pulpit. as this is. And it is not to get stuck in the differences, to harden the polarization. It is time to explore what to do about this from a spiritual and a UU point of view. Mike McGrail spoke of these differences in his fine sermon of several weeks ago. He kept his description of the differences more along religious lines and encouraged understanding that in many cases, religious conservatives do practice what they preach. The focus here is developing understanding of a different kind. The fact is, all this understanding and exploration of late has caused me to suffer and led me to despair. While I can attempt to understand, that understanding has mostly of late has resulted in my continuing to be angry about too many people going shoeless. So I look for balance through the spiritual and religious traditions of Unitarian Universalism. The most obvious connection to suffering is, of course, Buddhism, because it is such a central tenet, spelled out in the Four Noble Truths. The Four Noble Truths of Buddhism are stated in simple terms. Suffering, pain, and misery exist in life. Suffering arises from attachment to desires. Suffering ceases when attachment to desire ceases. Freedom from suffering is possible by practicing the Eightfold Path. So if I'm to understand this correctly, I am suffering because I am attached to the idea that political conservatives should think like me. When I read the paper or listen to the news, I repeatedly reinforce my desire and craving to have the world think and believe as I do. My ego is gratified when I read an article or opinion piece that coincides with my desire to have the world as I want it. I become angry and despairing when I see or read something that does not. Buddhism promises liberation from this suffering by practicing the Eightfold Path. Simply put, the path spells out how to live and practice a right life. The most salient of these paths for me would be right mindfulness, in which I practice acceptance of this different way of thinking, and through meditation, attempt to detach from it. The Judeo-Christian tradition has its own way of articulating this. Psalm 55:22 says, "Cast your burden on the Lord, and he will sustain you. He will never permit the righteous to be moved." Those of you familiar with 12-step programs will be acquainted with this. The third step states, "We made a decision to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understood him." The spiritual practice or ritual to accomplish this step is spelled out in the third step prayer. God, I offer myself to you to do with me as you will. Relieve me of the bondage to self so that I may better do your will. Bondage to self. While that may sound graphic or archaic to many, it still rings as an accurate description when I slide over into a state of wanting to exert my will to change that which I cannot change. Ultimately, the only way to liberate oneself, to free oneself from this bondage is to surrender to the powerlessness of the situation. Most of us are familiar with the serenity prayer. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. It is this last part, the wisdom, that is the stumbling block. It is the lack of wisdom that leads me to believe I have the ability to change things when acceptance is the place to put my efforts. The long form of the serenity prayer adds, accepting hardship is the pathway to peace, taking this world as it is, not as I would have it, trusting that God will make all things right by surrendering to his will so that I may be reasonably happy in this life. Suffering, then prayer and meditation, then acceptance. Repeat as needed. While in a state of acceptance that lasts long enough, I am able to look down and notice that I am the one who is not wearing shoes.
We extinguish this flame, but not the light of truth, the warmth of community, or the fire of commitment. These we carry in our hearts until we're together again.
And so we have come to the end of another service. And so we have come to another time of being together. And so we have come to this place with hope and with courage, and most of all with love. We prepare to leave here knowing that it is important how we act out in the world. It is important, the words, the thoughts, and the energy that we share. At this, the end of April, we remember Mother Earth who blesses us all, who holds us, who is full of wondrous surprises. In love we gathered, and peace we go forth. This is our goal. Amen.
There is more love somewhere. There is more love somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more love somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. There is more hope somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more hope somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. There is more peace somewhere. I'm gonna keep on till I find it. There is more peace somewhere. There is more